Hello, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to HC Live. My name is Colleen Baker. I am a producer here at the Houston Chronicle. Thank you all for joining us today. We are obviously here to talk about all things leaking wells and zombie wells, oil wells, you name it. We are going to probably cover everything. Our investigative reporter and energy reporter, Amanda Drain, who will be leading us in this discussion, knows all the things. First and foremost, I want to introduce our panelists as well as start asking everyone who is online if you can hear me. If you have questions, we will get to them in the later half of the session. So start dropping them in the comment section below. Where, if in Texas, are you? Are you watching from somewhere else? Me and Amanda are here in the Galleria area at the Houston Chronicle. Virginia Palacios from Commission Shift is actually in Laredo. I see someone is in Kingwood, and so I see a few people chiming in. First Ward is in the chat, so that's good. West Virginia. Okay, so we've had someone from outside of Texas. And again, Hawk Dunlap, by the way, still in Texas, but he is also not in Houston. He is in Grand Falls, Texas, in Ward County, which definitely has to be pretty far out there because I had not even been aware of Ward County. So definitely have a very exciting discussion today. A couple housekeeping items. We always will stick to our hour slot. The first half, Amanda will go through her questions, and then we will take the audience questions live. So please start submitting them. And also for those of you all who may have been logging on and excited to attend the conversation, quick note, we were expecting a representative from the Railroad Commission. Mr. Keith May was going to be joining us, but unfortunately, they did let us know yesterday they had some scheduling issues, a little bit too complicated with everything going on, but that they really look forward to future dialogue around the topic. So if you do have questions that you want to ask the Railroad Commission or ask Amanda, we will get to everything that we currently can. So anyway, other than that, we in the chat have Columbus, Ohio, but a former Houstonian, and someone even from Brooklyn, New York. So having said that, anyone who isn't live and watching, we always will take this full event recording and put it up on our Houston Chronicle live playlist on our YouTube channel. So give us within 24 to 48 hours, but we should get it up pretty quickly so you can share it, you can rewatch it, anything you need, send it to friends and family. So without further ado, Amanda, are you there? Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can.
All right, we'll take it away, Amanda. Go ahead.
Do you want to introduce Virginia?
Sure. I mean, Virginia, probably could give more insight to everything you do at Commission Shift. Do you want? I'll let you say it because your work is so big in scope. Can you
Sure.
tell us a little bit more about Commission Shift? Just what it is, what your role at it is, and how people maybe have heard of it.
Sure. So I'm Virginia Palacios. I'm the executive director of Commission Shift based in Laredo, Texas. But Commission Shift is a Texas-based public advocacy organization transforming the state oil and gas agency by working with and for the people of Texas to create pathways for shared governance. And so we work on a number of different cleanup issues, including orphaned wells, carbon capture and storage, waste pits that take oil and gas waste, and venting and flaring. But one of the most important issues that we work on is ethics at the Railroad Commission of Texas, our state oil and gas agency.
Excellent. And Hawk, obviously, you're a pretty recognized name for your work here at the Chronicle. We've covered a lot of your stuff. Can you tell people how your work is involved in this topic, but also, where they may have heard of your work and where they would find you?
Right. Thank you. And thank you for having me on. I'm Hawk Dunlap. I'm a sixth generation Texan. I'm fourth generation in oil and gas. I'm working on my 35th year of actual oil and gas experience. And for the past nearly 4 years, I've been in West Texas digging up, plugging, and abandoned wells and inspecting them for several landowners in the area. And I've dug up quite a few of the Railroad Commission's wells that they plugged under the orphan well program and found them to be leaking as well. And in fact, I'm standing on a location right now that the Railroad Commission plugged a well in April of 2021 as part of the orphan well program.
Okay, well, with that, I think Amanda can get started with just the amazing questions. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Amanda, take it away.
Well, I'll kick this question to Hawk since he's standing there at what I think is officially known as ground zero for the zombie well. I think it was coined at that site. So could you define what is a zombie well, Hawk?
Well, a zombie well is a well that had been previously plugged, that those plugs either failed, either by produced water injection or poor plugging practices, and have started flowing back to surface again.
And how is that different from an orphaned well?
Well, an orphan well, like the one that I'm standing in front of right now, an orphan well becomes a ward of the state or an orphan if the operator of record becomes insolvent, bankrupt, or typically what happens, there's quite a bit of integrity problems downhole, or the well is not producing, and a lot of times it costs more to plug than it does for them just to go bankrupt and change the name of a company and go do something else. So these wells typically become a ward of the state, and I think there's over 10, maybe close to 11,000 numbers of what people are saying now. I believe there's a lot more. I've always said that there's wells in Texas that God doesn't know about, and I found a couple of them.
Virginia, could you talk a bit about what's going on right now with orphan wells in Texas and how the numbers are moving?
Yeah, so when I first started doing this work in 2020, there were about 6,500 orphaned wells in the state. And like Hawk said, we're at about 11,000 as of the end of October 2025. And so the number is rapidly increasing. But aside from orphaned wells that have no active operator, the bigger problem is also inactive wells that still have an active operator on file that should be responsible for plugging those wells. And so there's about 119,000 inactive wells in the state, and another 35,000 or so that are just shut in and have been shut in for less than a year. They might come back online if prices improve. But it's a huge population of unplugged wells out there that are potential sources for groundwater contamination and methane leakage, which can warm our climate.
So we've got zombie wells, we've got the rising number of orphan wells. What does this mean for the leaking well issue in Texas? Why are we seeing more leaking wells? Hawk, you want to kick that off?
Look, the typical life cycle of a well is 30 to 40 years. Okay. And where I'm standing now, these wells were drilled in the 50s. So, they're 70 plus years old. Steel is in the ground is only designed to last so long. There's corrosion problems. We have massive produced water injection. Toxic fluids coming from the wellbore will start to eat away at the casing and start to create holes, which start to give pathways to our freshwater aquifers. And then our plugging practices. We've done. I hate to be the negative Nelly of the industry, and I'm really not. We've done so well, safety and drilling technology on the front end of the industry. We're drilling wells more efficiently. We're drilling them quicker. We're drilling them safer. We're not burning down as many rigs as we used to. And but on the back end, on the abandonment side and the plugging side, we haven't really changed anything. Now, out here on this 22,000 acres, I tell people we've got like a cadaver farm, and we've got wells that were plugged in the 60s all the way up to 2023, and we discovered that they're all leaking. And we have the produced water problem. We have poor plugging practices, but we're also using the same media and plugging wells the same way that we've been doing for decades. And this is the 21st century, and cement has improved. Different other media, you've got polymers, you've got epoxies, and we've really advanced ourselves, and we have the technology, but we're not using it on the back end, and mostly because to plug a well, it's a straight cost. Nobody's going to make any more money out of this well, and you've heard me say it before, and you'll hear me say it again. nobody likes to pay for a funeral. And people want to plug these wells as cheaply and as quickly as possible. And this is what the result is. So what we have out here is a huge laboratory. And so we can go back to the 60s to when these wells were first starting to be plugged up to 2023. And we can look and we can say that our practices are not really working. Let's do a stop. Let's start experimenting with different media, different plugging media, different plugging practices. And let's start trying to change this so that every 50, 60, 70 years, we don't have to come back and replug them. If we plug them right the first time, then we won't ever have to come back and do it again.
Now, for the audience, produced water is the industry term for oil and gas wastewater that flows back from a well after it's been fracked. And there's a lot of that waste that needs to find a home, and it often gets injected underground. So how much of the leaking well issue is an issue of that wastewater coming back up versus a well plugging issue?
Well, I think they kind of run hand in hand. And let me correct, produced water is not just associated with fracking. Okay, anytime that you produce hydrocarbons, you're gonna have oil, you're gonna have gas, and you're gonna have water being produced. And we have to, we can't stop. Our practice right now historically is injecting the produced water back into the ground. And we can't really stop that because if we don't have a way, something to do, if we can't get rid of the water, then we're going to have to curtail our production. And we don't want that. We don't need that. There's different ways to deal with the water. That's a whole nother story, whether, on mass scale of recycling and repurposing the water, which I'm a huge advocate for. But we're going to have to start doing something different. Now, once I said again, these wells were drilled 70 some odd years ago, and they've outlived their life cycle. And then now that we're injecting into these formations out here in the Central Basin Platform, we're adding additional pressure already onto a compromised wellbore. And this is leading to some of the causes too.
Virginia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think the scale of the problem is huge. I think, underground injection is one thing that's influencing these wells to leak, but even in the Eagleford Shale, where we're not experiencing tremendous amounts of overpressuring from underground injection, there's evidence of groundwater contamination from unplugged well bores. And so I don't think we can entirely blame it on that. And I think there are still really good reasons to make sure that wells get plugged in a timely manner in all parts of the state. I think it's also important for people to know that orphaned wells are not only a problem in the Permian Basin and West Texas, but there's hotspots all over the state, including East Texas, the Gulf Coast, and now there's a hotspot that's been growing around Bexar County and San Antonio, where there's new orphaned wells popping up. The Permian Basin is an older oil field. It has far more orphaned wells than other parts of the state, but in the Eagleford Shale, where we're a newer play, we have thousands and thousands of inactive wells that are waiting to become orphaned.
What do we know about the scale of the issue? How many wells are leaking in Texas?
So I was just looking at the Railroad Commission's data the other day. They have a prioritization table of all the orphaned wells. So which well is going to get plugged first? And so the wells that are supposed to get plugged first are the wells that are leaking. And on the current list of about 10,900 wells, about 115 wells are listed as actively leaking, and they're priority one wells for getting plugged. But we hear complaints from landowners all the time here at Commission Shift who say they have inactive wells that are leaking. A Railroad Commission inspector goes out to check out the well and says, oh, it's not leaking bad enough for us to make the operator plug it or for us to plug it. And so I think there's a much wider population of wells that are leaking and are potential sources of groundwater contamination, and they're not being dealt with fast enough.
Well, I agree 100%. That 100 and something number is way off. I can take you within half an hour from where I'm standing, and I can show you 100 leakers. I mean, that's just that's easy. With the technology that we have today, and what we really need to start thinking about is, we have AI, we have drone technology, we can locate wells, we can locate methane leaks, and we can take, for instance, a well in Pecos County. I know of one well. I think it cost $960,000 to plug, and then right across the fence was another plug job that cost $350,000. And we can focus our money. We can focus all this new technology and all this new information that we have, and put it into AI and come up with a risk assessment of where does it cost us the most, where are we having the most problems, and these are the areas that we need to focus on. And we can take that in consideration. We can also add not just leaks, but where our population centers are. We closer to a high dense populated area that can be included into the risk matrix. And I think we can do a lot better job of identifying our hotspots and being more truthful about it, and being able to attack this problem before you have a catastrophic failure at surface, and then everybody's scrambling and we're throwing money out the window, trying to get on a well which we should have been on 10 years ago.
So we're talking about the threat of groundwater contamination underlying all of this. What do we know about how often that's happening and how much of an impact it's having on the aquifers in Texas?
Yeah,
I
I'd
have.
say.
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead, Virginia.
okay,
No,
sure. Yeah, I'd say, we have a lot of events that have been recorded of groundwater contamination, but there's not good data being kept by the state of Texas on whether an orphaned well has caused groundwater contamination or whether an unplugged well has caused groundwater contamination. There's an annual report that the Railroad Commission submits data to called the Joint Groundwater Monitoring and Contamination Report. And in any given year, there's about 500 groundwater contamination incidents that are related to oil and gas that are kind of cycling through the enforcement process at the Railroad Commission and the remediation process. But that data set doesn't tell you exactly what caused the groundwater contamination. So you have to kind of infer certain things. And I think another really important thing that the state is not doing is requiring groundwater testing every time there's a leak. And so, we're not getting the Railroad Commission out there taking a sample, sending it to a lab every time we get these reports or a complaint about a leak. And so we don't know the full extent of groundwater contamination caused by unplugged wells in the state of Texas.
she's very, very correct. We just don't have enough printed data. I have firsthand knowledge of a water well that's 290 foot deep. It's just to the east of me here. Uh, they went to pull the completion to plug the water well, and there's 2.5 feet of crude oil in it. I got accused of dumping motor oil into the water well. We took a sample of the oil, we sent it to the lab, and it came back fingerprinted as the same oil from the Queen Sand at 2,500 feet. We also have another monitoring well that's been able to detect some produced water intrusion. And we've also got several other cases, and this is firsthand knowledge. Now, is it put into paper? Is it fully studied like it should be? No, it's not. And that's not something that folks want to get out, but I think that's something that folks need to know about.
I mean, I'll agree with Huck. I think it would be great if we had more data, but I also think like it doesn't take a genius to see that you got to plug a well to protect groundwater sources. And so, it's a little bit of a red herring to say, where's the data? This isn't a widespread problem when anybody could see that an unplugged well, in an oil and gas producing region can cause groundwater contamination.
So the issue of leaking wells has been in the news quite a bit over the past couple of years, and there have been some efforts to address the issue. From y'all's perspective, what action have you seen taken to address the issue?
There's a lot of money floating around, both at the state level and the federal level to plug orphaned wells. But something that's important to know is that this is a policy problem, not a money problem. And so there was a bill passed this legislative session called SB 1150 that is ostensibly going to require operators to plug their inactive wells within 15 years of the well being inactive. However, there's a lot of built-in loopholes in that law. And I think what we saw in that process is that oil and gas companies have an outsized influence on the Texas legislature and the Railroad Commission of Texas. And so we're not getting clean, simple laws that are meant to actually deal with the problem. We're getting laws that are carving out little loopholes for every different kind of company. And so I think some good things came out of SB 1150. Operators are going to be required to test their wells on an annual basis now. And if they fail the test, they have to plug the well. And there's an opportunity for the Railroad Commission to have a rulemaking that will require different kinds of public and environmental health monitoring. The agency should end up with 40 new inspectors at the end of all of this. And so that's a really good thing. But I think we need to do more to make sure that operators aren't just getting plugging extensions indefinitely and delaying plugging their wells indefinitely. And so that's an important consideration. This year, the legislature ended up appropriating around $400 million over the biennium for well plugging. That's more than has ever been appropriated for orphaned well plugging. The costs are going up. Some of that money came from the budget surplus that we had this year. In years prior, the money has come from the oil and gas industry itself, which is a good thing. They should be paying for their own cleanup. And so increasingly, taxpayers are being asked to foot the bill for orphaned well plugging. And we know from the state, the average cost of well plugging, that it is going to cost around $600 million to plug all the wells on the list. But that's an underestimate because it's just based on averages that we have. And then when you take the inactive wells into account, the cost to plug all those is around $16 billion.
Wow.
No, I agree. You know, the Senate bill, I comment on it. I'm under the camp that, you know, if you walk away from a well for 5 years, more than likely you're not ever going to come back to it. You know, like I said earlier, the life cycle of a well is 30 to 40 years, and you add another 15 years on there. And then you go to plug it. There's no, as long as that steel sits in the ground, as long as that produced water sitting there eating on the steel, you know, we have hydrogen sulfide that eats away steel. It's going to complicate matters more and more and more. And these older wells, and I use the analogy, the medical analogy, and I use it when I was talking to a cardiologist. You know, we'll say these wells are 70-year-old men, and if they come into the emergency room and they're non-responsive, a medical team will run a battery of tests, and they'll do blood work, and they'll, you know, check hearts, and they, you know, do all these things, and before they make a diagnosis and a procedure which to treat the patient. Typically out here, what we do is we do a cookie cutter plugging solution, and we plug all these wells the same. And none of these wells are going to have to be looked at the same. They're all going to have to be looked at individually. And you're going to have to look at the history of the well, the production history of the well, and you're going to have to look at the well as it is now. And you're going to have to look for integrity issues and holes in casing, what fluids were exposed, what gases were exposed to the well before you can formulate a proper plugging plan. If we just do a one size fit all, we're going to be fighting this thing for the next millennium.
So I will add that the Railroad Commission also put out some reforms that took effect June 1 that make the permitting process a bit more stringent for companies that are permitting saltwater disposal wells, and they expanded the radius of review for those new wells, so that the operators have to look for orphan wells, wells plugged a long time ago, as they have to look at them as potential leak points, and that is taken into account in the permitting process. So it was just one other thing that was done. With all of this, what do you think about the burden here? Who's bearing the burden of the cost?
I mean, I would say landowners are bearing the burden, right? Landowners that are facing these leaking wells, having their property destroyed, having their groundwater contaminated. I was worried earlier this year that my groundwater was contaminated. Thankfully, it wasn't, but I was really, it made me emotional, right? Because if you don't have water, you don't have a ranch. And the ranch that I live on has been in my family for 4 generations. It means a lot to me. And, you know, we can't just allow oil and gas companies to go all throughout Texas, destroy lands, and pretend that it's just about the money. I mean, it's about so much more. It's about our identity as Texans. It's about our love of the land, and it's about past and future generations. And so, I think it's important to look at what we're doing broadly in the state of Texas by allowing this to happen.
Just let me add to that, and let me be very clear on this. There is no reason for a landowner to have to go pay a lawyer to do the job of the Railroad Commission. Okay, there's no reason for that. That's why the Railroad Commission is there. If you look behind me, this, like I said, this is a Railroad Commission site. Not only is the well leaking, they leave the tank here, they leave the poly line, there's sucker rods, polish rods over here behind me, and the plastic from the pit is still in the ground. And he said, well, there's plastic in the pit. Well, people that run cattle, believe it or not, cows that chew on this plastic, it gets stuck in the room, and the cattle end up getting hardware disease and they end up dying from it. And there's absolutely no cleanup. So let's dump a bunch of cement in a well. Let's cover it up. We'll roll the tank on top of it, and we're going to tick the box and say this is plugged. And we're going to go back to the legislature and say, we plugged 1,700 wells this year. No, you didn't. You put cement in 1,700 wells this year. You didn't clean up. You didn't finish the job. And as far as I'm concerned, this case is still open.
And one other thing I'll add just on like who's bearing the cost. Texas is in an increasingly dire state when it comes to water. We have been going through an extreme drought for years now. There was one just 10 years ago, right? In 2011, 2012. And so it's been back-to-back droughts for us. Most parts of the state are facing water availability issues. And so if we're allowing the risk of oil contamination, produced water contamination in our water supplies throughout the state, that just gives us less water to work with, and we're putting ourselves in a bad position. Not to mention, the methane that leaks from these wells. Methane is around 86 times more potent as a climate forcer than carbon dioxide. And so they say that about 25% of the excess warming that we're experiencing today is coming from methane. And so if we can plug these wells and reduce methane emissions, we also can set ourselves up for a better climate in the future.
And let's not forget about trying to clean the produced water as well, and trying to wean not just the oil and gas industry, but we have these AI data centers that are going to use millions and millions of gallons of water. We need to plan for that. We're at a water shortage right now. We're at a crossroads. We don't start making some hard decisions about what to do with water and how to replace the water that's being used. And I'm not saying produced water is fit to drink or water in tomato plants, but I'm saying it can be diverted to industry to start keeping the industry off our surface water and our groundwater. And we need to start doing a better job of protecting it, because sometimes life in Texas and places is hard enough, but it's even harder if you can't get a drink of water.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen the questions pouring in. Is it time for question and answer, Colleen?
Absolutely. We've got a ton. So I'll hop straight in because actually I want to start with you, Amanda, on this part, and then Virginia and then Hawk, I think will both be really great at this kind of angle. Someone in the chat was asking, why have civilians not been notified of the locations of the orphan wells of their homes? And so Amanda's reporting, I will say, is to me, because I worked with her, obviously, is the most insightful and profound way of showing why civilians need to even know about the issue, right? That's not even including Virginia and Hawk's outspoken advocacy for the topic. So, Amanda, can you shed a little bit more light about maybe why civilians or people haven't been notified even, or are not aware of this being such a big issue, unless if it were for your reporting?
Well, we do have a searchable map. I don't know if you email me,
I can
send it
also
to you.
drop it in the chat, or we'll include it in the notes.
The Railroad Commission does have a massive list of all the orphan wells, and it's publicly available. But it's hard to digest, so we did try to put it in a searchable map so you can learn more about how closely you live to an orphaned well.
I'll drop that in the chat right now. And Virginia, can you maybe speak to that first as well? Why maybe Texans or civilians haven't really been notified, other than like what Amanda's talking about? You could go to the Railroad Commission website, or you can check her reporting, but is there any other public way to get the information out other than that's not already being provided?
That's such a good question. I don't think there's, any way for landowners to be notified unless you're the landowner where the orphaned well is. But certainly there are plenty of orphaned wells in urban areas, especially, the Barnett Shale has a lot more towns and cities with urban drilling. There aren't actually as many orphaned wells in the Barnett Shale area, but in some of the more rural surrounding areas, there can be. And so it is something where the data is becoming more available. And it was only recently that the Railroad Commission started publishing latitude and longitude coordinates for all the orphaned wells. It was only in the past year or two that they started doing that. And so big thanks to Houston Chronicle for making those maps publicly available.
And Hawk,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to go out to you in Ward County, which is obviously not in Houston, but you might have more people telling you that the issue has become so obvious that it needs to be more directed at the people that live in the area. What do you think?
It does, and it's statewide. And I'll give an example. My hometown in Longview, in a neighborhood, we used to play baseball in a gas well location. And several years ago, I was kind of reminiscing and going back through the old neighborhood, and they built a house on top of that gas well. And I don't know if the homeowner knows or not. And I don't know if it's my business to tell them, but they built a house on top of a allegedly plugged gas well. I mean, this is a huge problem, and I don't necessarily agree with the Railroad Commission's GIS system. When we were looking for wells out here, we were looking for one well that was nearly 400 yards off from where we found it, and I dug and dug and dug and dug. It looks like a mass grave over there, and we ended up having to bring surveyors in to use aerial imagery from the 50s and 60s and overlay that of the area that we were looking for, and then come out on in a side by side on foot, and actually use metal detectors to locate the wells and drive stakes for us to dig up and investigate. So a lot of the information on the Railroad Commission side is not accurate. That is not correct. We found wells that there's been no records of. And we dug for wells that there were records in a location, and there wasn't a well. So, there's a lot to do, and the more and more wells that we drill, and the more and more wells that we abandon, I think we need to come back, and we need to get an actual location with the technology that we have today, and it needs to be recorded. Neighbor over in McCamey was building a house, and we found a well for him, and it was fixing to be right in his living room, and he was going to be pouring a slab in a couple of days, and he had to shut down and move his whole house over just so he wouldn't build a house over a plugged well. So it's a huge problem, and as more and more people come to Texas, and we need to have that data. People need to be able to make a decision. Do I want a plugged well in my backyard while my kids are on the swing set, or do I want to try to look for another place to live? I mean, it's just people need to have the information to make those decisions.
And just to add to that, the state doesn't require actual latitude, longitude coordinates of where wells are drilled. Sometimes operators will include latitude, longitude coordinates for the lease gate, which can be very, very far away from where the well is actually drilled. And so we need finer data collection from the Railroad Commission on that kind of thing.
And Virginia, someone's actually spot on to your question or last comment. Someone was asking about how many miles from the injection sites should they be concerned with maybe an orphan well springing back up, kind of perimeter wise? Is there a rough estimate that people should be aware of?
It can be pretty far. I want to say the Railroad Commission even published on their webpage where they have the new guidelines that Amanda was talking about that sort of change the requirements for disposal wells in certain areas of the state. I want to say they said that there have been cases where the water traveled as far as 40 kilometers. That's not typical, but in certain cases it can go far. It can go miles, and so. The rules only require operators to investigate a quarter of a mile from the location of an injection well. And like Amanda was saying, they extended it to half a mile, I think, for certain parts of the Permian Basin. And so it's not science-based, it's just based on a metric that is easy for operators to comply with, and that's not good enough for the people of Texas.
It's like playing pin the tail on the donkey, as far as I'm concerned. I've got a well here that was plugged in the late '60s, and it pressures up sometimes to 1,200 psi. It drops down to 900 psi. We've recorded this data digitally, and then we've looked around the surrounding area, and 3 miles away there are four injection wells. And the only logical conclusion that I could come to is that this plug and abandoned well is reading the pressure from 3 miles away from one of the injection wells over there. So, and I had reported this well to the Railroad Commission, and I really thought, in good sense, this is a great case study. Let's look at this. Let's try to figure out what we're reading and what we're seeing, so that way we can get some knowledge, we can get some learning, we can get some data points, and then we can start making adjustments. And basically, they have no interest.
And I would add that it has a lot to do with the geology of the given area, how far the water can travel. In some cases, I published a story last week about this. The geyser from last October, where Hawk was at, the injection well that was determined to be the primary contributor to the event was 3.3 miles away. And in some cases, scientists have learned that the water has traveled, or the pressure plume associated with the water, at least, has traveled as far as 10 miles.
So I agree with that.
Someone was sounding off in the comments about the environmental damage needing to be included in the calculus of everything. On top of that, I want to add an emotional damage. I know that's kind of a far reach, but this is my opinion. Virginia, your comment about a family land in Laredo, that's emotional inherently. That's not only just environmental. Can you speak to something to that effect of just the environmental and emotional side of what this impact can really do if this were really truly fixed and made, and how things could help,
For sure. I mean, running a ranch is not easy. It's, I don't even have any cattle at this point in time, but, there's always something broken to fix. You end up putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears trying to make a ranch property survive and, be livable and all that. And so, over 4 generations of that happening, there's a lot of emotional attachment. I don't think I'm the only Texan who has that kind of emotional attachment to their land. And, to have something taken away so quickly by such a young industry that has only been around for about 130 years is, it's sad. It's sad to see our landscape changing so much so quickly and to be losing the things that we love. When it comes to climate change, I think about something as simple as like bluebonnets on the ranch. I grew up as a kid like loving wildflowers and going out and looking for wildflowers all day long. And we had lots of bluebonnets on the ranch. And since 2021, we had Winter Storm Uri right at the time of year when the bluebonnets were about to come out. And I haven't seen a bluebonnet since. We've had drought since then, and no more bluebonnets on the ranch. And so that's just one small example of how this kind of stuff impacts people. But imagine your water being contaminated. Imagine having to like truck in water. It's difficult. It adds challenges to your daily life and takes up a lot of time that you'd rather be spending, with family or doing something else that enriches your life.
It, it,
Absolutely.
it's rampant. I feel the same way about the whole state, and I hear stories all the time. And one lady in East Texas, they built a dream home. They got a nice little 3 or 4 acre pond. The husband fishes. They've got their horses. This is their dream home. This is what they worked for all their life. They've got 2 wells on their property. They've both of them been turned loose on the numerous occasions. Oil and produced water gets in their pond. It's killed their fish. It's killed their coastal Bermuda grass. And they can't get it cleaned up. And they just finally got to the point where they're surrendered and they put their house on the market. It's their dream home. And this is a huge factor. Texas come first, and these things it should be cleaned up. They should be addressed. It shouldn't be where the landowner's just a doormat for somebody to run them over. And I'm seeing more and more of this all the time, and it's disheartening where we are right now, and I take it very personally.
Hmm. And actually, something I want to touch base on, someone in the comments was asking, aside from the Permian Basin, what other areas of Texas are experiencing these wells? And Hawk, you were saying this is statewide. Amanda's reporting Virginia. Everyone's saying this is statewide. Can you, Hawk, start us off by just kind of telling us what the main areas that are experiencing the wells are?
Well, of course, gosh, I've only been back from overseas for 4 years, but I grew up in the East Texas field, drilled in the 30s. We're coming up on 100 years of that. We've got Louisiana restricting how much produced water they can inject in Louisiana, so they're trucking it across Texas and they're injecting it into East Texas. It's coming, and there's been a few instances of it already happening over there. Down in South Texas, we're going to start seeing, that maybe they don't inject as much produced water, of course, as we do here in the Permian. But if we continue to inject and we keep on injecting, sooner or later it's going to be a huge problem. And what I can't get my head around is we have the technology to treat this water, and yes, it's going to cost money. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. And I'll give you an example. I like to keep my jeans and my shirt starched, and it costs me $80 a week. But I can dispose of 130 barrels of produced water for $65. So my laundry bill is more expensive than injecting 130 barrels of produced water. So, whether we put a 10 cent a barrel tariff, if you will, on every barrel that goes in the ground to help us start funding our orphan well problems and our plugging program, and to start to try to incentivize other people to start putting in produced water treatment facilities, and start encouraging these AI data centers to start using treated water and start getting our industry off our fresh water. There's a lot of hard decisions and a lot of hard talk that has to be made, and it's not only going to have to come from the commission, it's going to have to come from the legislatures, and everybody's going to have to get involved in this. And we're just going to have to start talking about the white elephant in the room, and quit trying to sweep everything under the rug.
Yeah, and I'll just add, in terms of other incidents that have happened with unplugged wells, there was an orphaned well blowout in 2019 down in Refugio or Refugio County. That was another big one, kind of like the geyser like well blowouts that we've seen in West Texas in recent years. And there's other examples of injection wells and wells creating issues in East Texas. There's been a sinkhole in Diceta. Even down here in Webb County, there were $3 million well blowouts that happened a few years ago. And so they don't always look big and showy. They don't always end up in the news, but there's something happening in different parts of the state all the time.
Mhm. I have a question in the chat. I'll start with Amanda because, this seems a little bit more on the prosecutorial side. So you might have a little bit more insight from your reporting. Someone's asking, the commission has allowed the operators to certify H-15s too easily. Why don't they prosecute them for filing false forms? Can you kind of talk about what H-15s are and the certification process? Do you know a little bit about that might shed some light to the audience about what that means?
Yeah, last month I did a story about an allegation from rancher Skylar White, is one of Hawk's neighbors, saying that that Oxy had falsified a well integrity form. H-15 tests are well integrity tests that ensure that the wells aren't letting water leak into the groundwater. And it's been rumored for some time that there are falsifications of these tests. At times, operators have been caught. But I think there's some questions there about how to handle that moving forward. And I'm not sure if the Railroad Commission has finished its investigation of that particular claim from Skylar, or if they're still pursuing it.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, there have been numerous claims of falsified H5 or H15 tests. I think with SB 1150 passing, part of the intention with that bill and the rulemaking that the Railroad Commission will have on inactive wells is that they will get additional staff to be able to better enforce those kinds of policies and inspect the actual wells. So they're supposed to get around 40 field inspectors because of SB 1150. And so that will be more boots on the ground going and verifying and making sure that those well tests are correct, we hope.
What are those? Is it experienced boots on the ground? And are they going to know what they're looking at? I mean, look, let me, I talk a lot of smack on the commission, but there's some really good people that work at the agency, and I've met them and I've spoke with them, and they are understaffed, they are underpaid. You're not going to hire experience for what the inspectors are being paid. Not when you got roughnecks out here making, $30+ an hour working 14, they're going to have to get their pay up. We're going to have to hire experience, and they're going to have to get some intense training, and somebody's going to have to take them under their wing and show them. And turning a chart on a pressure test is simple. It's an easy thing to do. Keeping the valve closed, close to a well and pressuring up against a tested valve so you can hold it for 15 minutes. It's easy to do. And if you don't know the cheats and you don't know what to look for, this can continue on. And I really think you need some old dogs in the hunt that know all the ins and outs and the cheats to kind of keep everybody honest.
And someone's asking a great question in the chat. They were wondering how many homes are built over the top of these wells in Texas without any awareness by the homeowners. Because, like Virginia's saying, if there's one on your property and you didn't know about it, to me, without knowing Virginia's story of how she came to the knowledge, Amanda, do we have any sort of idea on that number, if how many homes are built over these wells, and if how the homeowners are even supposed to know about it?
I'm not aware of any notification system. And I mean, this is a problem in more than just Texas, any state where there's been legacy oil production. There's some old wells that no one knows about, and someone will build an apartment building or a hotel on top of it and later learn that there were some problematic wells underneath. So there's not a number associated with that, but there are a lot of undocumented wells that predate modern reporting. And even with the known orphan wells, I'm not aware of a process by which a homeowner is made aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, realtors
it's not disclosed. There's a company, Wellfax, I think that documents this kind of stuff, that kind of records this, and I think you can get information from them about real estate in the proximity to to where wells are and where your home is. A couple of months back, we were in Odessa and we located a plugged well in the backyard of a woman's home that she had no idea about. But there are companies that are recording this. But as far as I know, and speaking with them, there's nothing in real estate disclosures that say, oh, under your laundry room, there's a well that was plugged in 1962. Just to let you know, nobody disclosed.
Yeah, realtors are supposed to investigate and disclose that stuff, but I can imagine where they're not going to know to even go to the Railroad Commission's website and look for the database and all that. And so it would need to be kept with title of the property, right? And so I don't know if there's any kind of requirement for that in state law. Some states require placarding of plugged wells and fencing around them. Texas does not. And so that would be another way to sort of address the problem, is to just like put a little fence around it, show that there is something here that you don't want to dig into the subsurface and get into.
Can you give us one state or an example of maybe two that are doing it, maybe where there is a visual that there is something there?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that, but
New Mexico. New
Mexico.
Mexico, you have the well sign. It has to be above surface, and you have to have the well name and the API number. I believe it has to be on top of it, but it has to be located. And there are a few around here in West Texas. I call them grave markers. There are a few around here, but for the most part, they're cut off 3-4 foot below ground and buried up, and there you go. That's the end of it.
Yeah, that's great. New Mexico it always helps to have an example outside of Texas to look to, right? And actually, a few questions are asking, what can the public do about the issue? I mean, obviously, aside from speaking out and reporting on it, someone else, a separate person, was saying they wanted to get maybe all three of y'all's thoughts. I'll start with, maybe Amanda. What are your thoughts on the state of Texas creating programs involving maybe junior colleges or small colleges studying well plugging and testing materials for plugging? Amanda, I know this is kind of something that's out of your wheelhouse to like opine on, but what do you think? Is it maybe something that could be an educational and instructional way to get people into oil and gas and maybe change up the way we report, maybe using AI, like Hawk is talking about doing it in a different way?
I mean, I think the universities where folks study oil and gas, like either University of Houston, they are looking at well plugging techniques, and they do. So that is studied. I mean, beyond that, I would encourage everyone to stay informed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think these issues are hard to tackle in large part because they are technical, and I think the technicality of it can turn away some people. But when there's power in an informed populace, so keep paying attention.
Yeah, Virginia, do you want to sound off? What do you think about
Yeah.
creating kind of programs like this?
No, I think the jobs opportunity is huge for unplugged well plugging. Something that's important to be aware of is that oil and gas profits have been increasing while labor has been shrinking in the oil and gas industry. And that's because companies are finding more efficient ways to drill and extract more product from wells. And so this could be a really important way to put people back to work and do the thing that we know needs to get done. And so I think technical training programs to teach people proper cementing techniques and plugging techniques would be an excellent thing to see at more of our junior colleges throughout the state. And in terms of other things that people can do to address the problem, please follow Commission Shift. You can go to commissionshift.org and sign up for our newsletter on the Get Involved page. There is going to be a rulemaking at the Railroad Commission on the inactive well plugging bill. And the more comments that we can get from members of the public on that bill showing support for strong standards, the better off we're going to be. And so it really does make a difference when people come out, when they speak out, when they make it clear that they expect a higher standard from the state.
Well, I agree. I'm excited. I have a landowner with over 200 orphan wells on his ranch, and this is a perfect laboratory. And we can try new techniques. We can try new media. we can bring the students out and get them involved and do internships, and we can use all this new technology and have it in one laboratory. And like I said, Texas leads the way in technology as far as drilling and completions and productions. We need to start turning this steer and start leading the way in how we retire these assets. And this is a great laboratory out here. There are vendors with new products that are willing to give their products for free or at cost to prove them up. And we can have a 3,000 acre laboratory in which we can study new techniques, and it's not going to be as nasty of a cost because everybody's that I've spoken to is willing to kick in a little bit to try to improve the process so that we don't ever have to go through this again. And I'm really encouraged by this that we can get this done.
Absolutely. And here's a little bit of a curveball, but we talked about New Mexico and looking outside of Texas for, some inspiration or ideas. Someone actually in the chat is asking, what do they do in Canada? They were discussing orphan wells at least 25 years ago. I do not know of that relationship, but does anyone, Amanda, Virginia, or Hawk, do you all know anything about Canadian approach? And if not, maybe it's food for thought.
I know I know that there was an approach at one point in time, and I don't know if this is still in place in Canada, where there was a requirement to look at the economic limit of the well and base well closures based on the economic viability of the well. And so when production declined far enough, if your operating costs ended up being higher than your production costs, now it's time to plan to plug the well, right? And actually, I think part of that policy was to plan in advance for that economic limit and plan to plug the well when you got there, instead of waiting years and years and years after the well is already inactive, past its economic limit. And so that would be an excellent policy to implement in Texas. We're not there yet.
I'll simplify it. If the well doesn't produce enough hydrocarbons to pay the light bill to keep the pump jack running, we need to plug the well. Plain and simple.
Mhm. Okay, I have a question that's a little bit of a fact check and some insight from Amanda's reporting. Someone's asking, isn't it true that Texas doesn't require enough surety for permits, like bonding for insurance, and that it makes it easier for companies to, quote, fly by night and abandon a well so that the Railroad Commission and taxpayers are left paying to plug it up? Shouldn't the operator or driller be responsible for plugging? Amanda, can you make sure to set the scene and fact check that? Is that kind of what's in alignment with your reporting?
There's not enough surety to pay the cost to plug the well generally. There's been a lot of discussion about how to address that, and there's a lot of debate about what the best solution is. There's even a new Houston company, I forget the name, whose whole business model is providing an insurance product essentially for the lifetime of a well, to address the issue. But yes, there's an issue with how to handle the cost of plugging the well at the tail end of its life.
And so operators for an individual well are required to put down, excuse me, a bond of $2 per foot, but it costs the state an average of $15 per foot to plug a well. And so that law, I think, was put into place in the early 2000s and has not been updated ever since. And there's also an option for blanket bonding, so they can bond all of their wells at once, just by paying a flat fee. I think that the highest bonding amount is $250,000 for 100 wells or more. So you could end up with less than $2,500 per well with a blanket bond. And it's costing the state an average of $52,000 per well to plug wells right now. So the bonding amounts are just way off from what they need to be. Even in 2017, the Railroad Commission's Sunset Review that went through the Texas legislature reported that the state was only paying for well plugging or bonds were only making up about 15% of the total funds that were used to pay for well plugging.
I'm probably going to get shot for this, but we're way behind on the bonding and everything. That we're hopeless right now. I will say that on every new drill, if you're gonna AFE between $4 and $8 million to drill a new well, let's say the average plugging cost in your district is $60,000. You need to add that to the AFE. That $60,000 goes in the fund. It remains with that API number of the well for the lifetime of the well, and that money is always available for when it comes time to plugging. In the meantime, that $60,000 continues to make interest, and that interest goes back into the well fund. We have ways, and there are many different ways that we can start to fund ourselves and start weaning the taxpayer off our industry. But it's like I said, I'm gonna have to take a lot of hate for my ideas, and we're just gonna have to swallow our pride. We're gonna have to start taking care of it ourselves. Otherwise, what I'm definitely afraid of is eventually down the road is that somebody from Washington D.C. who's never had on a pair of gloves is trying to tell business.
Well, no hate from anyone on the panel, Hawk, and none of the comments seem to be hateful. So again, we're at time, so I want to make sure we get off early to make sure everyone's time for lunch is respected and everyone can go enjoy their afternoon. Again, thank you to Hawk, who's out in the field, Virginia and Laredo and at Commission Shift, and Amanda and I obviously here in Houston at the Galleria area. But a friendly reminder again, we will make sure to get this entire video interview panel discussion up on YouTube. And clearly this topic will continue to grow, and it's only because of people involved and participating in these events like you all today. So thank you again to everyone who logged on. Thank you to our panelists and Amanda, and continue to follow our coverage at HoustonChronicle.com. And stay tuned because our upcoming HC Live will be with the runoff contest between Christian Menifee and Amanda Edwards. So that's coming up as our next big one as we head into the holidays. So everyone take care. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you again.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.